The question is that the motion be agreed to. Phil Twyford.
This is a shabby bit of politics from Nick Smith in the final 100 days of this tired national government. Why do I say it's shabby? Because this bill is basically about Nick Smith trying to score political points. You see, he thinks that if Labor opposes his bill to build 300 houses on a city park, that it somehow undermines the criticism that we make of his failed housing policy. Well, it doesn't, because the failure of that minister is writ large. His bumbling failures and utter inability to do anything about the housing crisis, while the hopes of a generation of young Kiwi families go up in smoke, that cannot be diminished or diverted by this pathetic little bit of theatre that this bill is, Mr Speaker. The National Party's legacy of record homelessness and the lowest rate of home ownership since 1951 cannot be diverted by this bill, as if building 300 houses on a city park is any kind of solution to the housing crisis. Why else is it shabby? It's shabby because Nick Smith has dragged Ngāti Pawa into his little game. And I want to repeat for the record, Mr Speaker, that Labor has no beef with Ngāti Pawa. We understand and respect their aspirations to settle their historical grievances, their aspiration for a place to stand. They've got a deal on the table, why wouldn't they take it? And sir, that is why Labor will vote for Ngāti Pawa's settlement when it comes to this House. But I say to Nick Smith and the Māori Party that if you thought that Labor's commitment to treaty settlement was so shallow that we would be blackmailed into supporting a classic half-baked Nick Smith scheme like this, then you horribly misjudged us. Labor's commitment to treaty settlement goes back to the Honourable Matu Rata. It is solid and enduring, but it doesn't mean we will go along meekly with an idea that is as misconceived and short-sighted as carving up one of the most precious open expanses of waterfront parkland in the entire city of Auckland and turning it into housing. It's shabby, Mr Speaker, because of Nick Smith's political game playing has dragged Ngāti Pawa's settlement into a climate of disenchantment and mistrust and cynicism in the local community. A community that feels betrayed by this minister and this piece of legislation. It didn't have to be like that. This is a shabby bill because the government has ignored a much better alternative. Instead of carving up this precious piece of city park land, they could instead have offered Ngāti Pawa 12 hectares of land just over the fence from the Point England Reserve for the commercial redress part of Ngāti Pawa's settlement. They could have offered Ngāti Pawa ownership of the entire reserve on the basis of perpetual public access. They could have offered Ngāti Pawa co-governance of the land at Point England, alongside 2 hectares of land for a marae on this achingly beautiful piece of land. It's shabby, sir, because Nick Smith has peddled falsehoods about this bill, as he is so prone to do. He says repeatedly that the land is underutilised. Well, tell that to the thousands of people who turn up for the Weet-Bix Marathon in the park, for movies in the park, and the generations who have played killikitty and all manner of sports on the land that Nick Smith is taking away with this bill. Nick Smith is obsessed with the 28 cows that have been grazing on part of this reserve. He's absolutely obsessed. He's so obsessed with cows on this land that he is passing a bill that will prohibit Auckland Council from grazing animals on the reserve that they are responsible for. I kid you not. This minister has got his meek, sheepish colleagues voting for a bill that will ban Auckland Council from grazing cows on this reserve, as well as ordering Auckland Council to replace the 3 playing fields that this bill obliterates with 3 new playing fields, when the only space left on the reserve to put these 3 new playing fields is on the precious waterfront headland. This minister needs his head read. Auckland Council say that they will not get a resource consent to do what this bill orders them to do. Once this bill is passed into law, Auckland Council face either being in breach of the Resource Management Act or in breach of this bill. It's unbelievable. Mr. Speaker, this is shabby because it cuts across the RMA, it cuts across the Reserves Act, when those acts have perfectly good consultation and decision-making processes for precisely this kind of endeavour. There are established democratic procedures in place for turning over reserve land for other purposes. But no, that's not good enough for this minister. It's shabby because this community in Glen Innes, one of the poorest and most disadvantaged communities in Auckland, needs this parkland for future generations. This community is about to get 20,000 extra people in the next 10 years because of the Tamaki Regeneration Project. Auckland is going to get another 1 million people. That's why Auckland Council came to the Parliament and said that this bill is a dangerous precedent. It's shabby, Mr. Speaker, because the National Government has treated this community in East Auckland, the people of Point England, Tamaki and Glen Innes, have been treated with utter contempt by the National Government. The Government didn't consult on this plan. They sprung it on the community when this bill was tabled in the House. This bill legislates away the democratic rights of that community. The Select Committee was timed to receive submissions over the January summer holidays when everybody was away. The local National MP, Sam Lotuiinga, claimed in this House that he had consulted his constituents and that they supported this bill. But he refused to meet face-to-face with local people in his electorate who are opposed to this bill. What a shame. What a shame. Nationals candidate Denise Lee in the seat of Maungakiekie refused to publicly debate this issue. Absolutely gutless. She wouldn't even stand up publicly and defend the policy of her party taking away 12 hectares of land from the community that she purports to represent. How disgraceful. And then we have Nick Smith coming to this House repeatedly perpetrating the lie that this land is underutilised. The reason this park has had cows grazing on it is that successive councils haven't properly invested in the parkland that belongs to one of the most poorest and disadvantaged communities in Auckland. And Nick Smith has the gall to come here and use that as a justification for confiscating 12 hectares of land. Unbelievable. I want to honour the people of Tamaki and Glen Innes and Point England who have stood up and resisted this travesty. The Save Our Reserves group mobilised their community against this bill, and I want to acknowledge Chi Ho, Sean Lee, Jen Vella, Julie Chambers, Helen Momuta, Tony Watkins and Chris Barfoot, and 4,000 other people, many of them who once voted for the National Party, who signed the petition opposing this bill. I also want to give special recognition to Labour's Maungakiekie candidate, Priyanka Radhakrishnan, who stood up and told the truth. She stood up for her community, unlike the members on that side of the House, who take for granted their people in that community. How appalling, how disgraceful. They should be absolutely ashamed of themselves on that side of the House. Mr. Speaker, this shabby bill will be seen for what it is. It's a tawdry bit of political game playing by a minister who has so spectacularly failed to build houses, who has totally failed in his responsibility as the housing minister to do anything about the housing crisis. So stung by that humiliation, he wants to prove to the world that he can build houses even on a treasured patch of city parkland. Yes.
Andrew Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.